Trustee of the Foundation of Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He has been a personal student of Mr. B.K.S. Iyengar over several decades and feels passionately about the deep philosophical underpinnings of Iyengar Yoga and the personal qualities of the man who evolved and taught these. Yoga, the Symphony of Life.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted and honored to be sitting next to my Guru Behan. She's one of Mr. Iyengar's most senior and experienced teachers, and she runs a center in Mumbai which is working to spread the boundaries and the frontiers of Mr. Iyengar's legacy. So she's a very, I'm just, someone who was blessed to study some yoga through Mr. Iyengar. I think that when we talk about the Symphony of Yoga, the reason we use the word symphony is it brings together, almost in a symphonic way, all the different elements of the human experience, of the human sensibility, into harmony. And so I'm going to start with asking Rajvi to give us a sense of what Mr. Iyengar understood to be yoga.
I would like to just start with his quote. He said, "Yoga is the rhythm of the body, the melody of the mind, the harmony of the soul to create the symphony of life." And that's how we got the title for this as the Symphony of Life. Now, for him, yoga and life were synonymous. And he started yoga at a time when yoga was quite a reclusive subject left for a very few people. And it was meant for mystics. So he was the one who brought it down to the common man. He came to the level of the common man and then elated them upwards. So if a man was suffering from pain, he gave them relief from pain. If they were having emotional disturbances, he brought stability in their life. He brought the clarity of thought. And that gave people the ability to live life better than what they were. So he always told people, yoga makes you better in whatever you do. The objective of yoga was not to make it a vocation or profession, but be a part of your life. And I think that came out very well. The famous violinist, a genius, Yehudi Menuhin, actually gifted him a watch where he said, "To my best violin teacher." And I think that just said that when you practiced, it transforms the individual to be better in whatever one is doing in life. And that gave people the happiness and the joy to continue life with oneness in whatever they did. So that was yoga for him.
I think that what Mr. Iyengar also did was that yoga for him was integrating the many, many, many elements of human experience and human sensibility. So it was nurturing the ability to live life to the fullest. So he was a householder who lived life with extreme simplicity. Those of you who have been to his ashram. So he embodied that value of a yogi while engaging with and encouraging and facilitating the engagement of people like Yehudi Menuhin, Pandit Nehru, J. Krishnamurti, right down to the common person off the street. So yoga was for him diverse and I think very importantly democratized. It came out of the ivory tower down to the people. And the other sort of very emphatic element of, we refer to him as, Gurujis. And that's really the second question, that what was a larger aspiration for yoga? People have always, we read about, you do yoga for health, you do a very mechanistic yoga because it's, makes you more athletic, or enable you to do all the things that further complicate your life. So very often you will have, say, corporations who will want to do yoga workshops so that people can then continue to do better the very things that create the crises and the problems for them. So the aspiration for yoga was very uniquely multidimensional. So I'm going to request Rajvi to give us a sense of how it was looking at spontaneously nurturing, say, an ethical life without a formal ethical framework which said, well, do this and don't do that. And so you ended up, through the practice of yoga, doing what was, to use a popular contemporary word, skillful.
It's very interesting, if you go back in time, and why did B.K. Iyengar start doing yoga? He didn't have an aspiration to do yoga. He incidentally went into yoga because he was a very sick boy, and his brother-in-law said, do some asanas and it'll give you health. And for somebody who has no health, actually values it a lot. So he started asanas, and then he realized that it is giving him much more than health. So first thing was that when people came to him with some limitations, problems, health issues, he started helping them. And today when we look across, people came with some back pain, knee pain, etc., etc. And then when you say, why are you continuing after 20 years, 30 years, they say there's a transformation in them and they're going toward the spiritual path. So the first thing is, he didn't ask people to go for some great spiritual aspirations. Unknown to them, they went on that path. So he said there is freedom with discipline is true freedom. And there's some very interesting example that he gave about yamas. Now the yamas is the first principle of yoga, where you speak truth, it's about honesty, non-violence, non-stealing, etc. And he said, have you ever thought, why is the Lord of Death also yama? So he said every human being has these intrinsic qualities to be untruthful, to lie. We may coin terms like white lies. We are violent within. So if somebody comes and becomes aggressive, you retaliate. There is this whole thing about stealing. You may put it under different names. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this whole thing about intellectual property. So all these attributes are there in the human being. But by the practice of yoga, you get transformed. So you don't have a choice of being honest or not. You become honest. So that was the transformation that happens, where you don't have rules and regulations and you become ethical. And this is universal. It does not have any kind of a religious or a geopolitical or any kind of boundaries. Because today we hear so much of as if it's associated with a particular religion. And mind you, you go across to any country in the world. Maybe it is strong Catholic religion, or it could be a Muslim country. I'll give you an example which touched me the most. Was in Jordan, in Amman. There was a workshop being held, the classes got over, and people started picking up the mats. And one lady, Sulema, who was running the class, said, please leave my mat behind. So I thought it was a special mat which she wanted to take it. And she says, no, it's time for my namaz. And on that yoga mat, she did a namaz. So these were things where they realized it's far beyond all the man-made boundaries. And that is what it really unites people when they know where we go, because of all these kind of barriers that have been created. And that was come only through practice, not through any kind of discourses. So when you practice, you transform and you become one with your neighbor. So that's how we change things.
If I could just elaborate a little bit, that when she talked about yama, it really is the eightfold path of yoga, yama niyama, which is the moral framework. And then you go to asana and pranayama and henceforth. So traditionally, and this is where Mr. Iyengar Guruji was pushing the boundaries, the prerequisite initially was that you first create the moral framework before you engage in asana or pranayama. That is still the orthodox way of doing it. The modern way has been to completely jettison that and not even include that in the vocabulary of yoga. I think what Guruji was really saying was that if the human form is the receptacle of consciousness and emotions, and so we have a posture, I mean, just a very simple illustration is that if you're depressed or feeling low, you hunch. If you're feeling expansive, you pull out. And extending that principle through the body as the repository of human emotion and human consciousness to be able to impact the most subtle aspects of the human being, in a sense, independent of a particular circumscribing, limiting philosophy or ideology or religion, so that you would evolve into a greater engagement of who you were individually and personally. So very important aspiration and approach to yoga of Guruji was the individualization, to particularize the practice of yoga for every student who came. In Udimenon, interestingly, the narrative is that when Udimenon first sort of approached Guruji, who happened to be in London before a performance, Udimenon had to cancel the performance because he just wasn't up to performing. So the first thing that Iyengar did was that he pressed sort of the points in his body so that he went into a state of deep relaxation and extended sleep, so that he was rested enough to be able to begin the process of, the sadhana of yoga. So I just, sort of ask, you have been a long-term student, and I've only dabbled in yoga in a sense with Guruji, that this aspect of individualization, of precision, that made him so unique and remarkable.
See, he gave a lot of emphasis to the asanas, which are loosely translated in English as postures. For him, the posture indicated your state of mind and emotions. And if you notice, a person who is very depressed would be slouching shoulders. And if you look at any text or even novel, they will say a person with a depressed person will have, rounded shoulders, sunken chest. That's description of depression. So the first thing is that he coined his own terminology, that you open the chest out. And when you have that opening of the chest, your mind becomes alert. So that posture became very, very important, whether you are sitting or one is standing or doing any of the complicated asanas. Now what becomes important is that we give very little importance to the posture. Now even when we are sitting now, how many of us are aware that we are made of the left and right side of the body, and we tend to give too much weight on one side. And when that happens over a period of time, we start leaning. Now the skeletal-muscular body is nothing else but the pillars and beams of our structure within which the organs sit. So if those pillars and beams are not okay, then naturally the organs are going to be affected. And if the organs are affected, our mind is going to be affected. We cannot say I have a stomach ache, but my mind is very sharp. That's not possible. So we become irritable, we have emotional disturbances, we don't have clarity of thought. So through the asanas, he made us experience the various states of our own existence. And that's why he was very, very particular about the posture of an individual. And today what happened is that when he emphasized so much on the posture, people tended to believe that the posture is a physical entity. But posture is not a physical entity. You cannot divide the body and mind. Body, mind, emotions go hand in hand. And that's how he made us practice, so that they all get integrated. Now what happens is that if you're not sitting correctly and you're unable to do the postures, do you compromise? And if you don't do it correctly, it's not going to be efficacious. It's like, I am taking medicine. But are you taking the medicine of the right quality? For medications, you have the FDA, which makes sure of the quality of the medication. But here, if the quality is not there, it's not going to be efficacious, and that's not good for the individual. So that he actually studied, he would say, I've studied the human anatomy and physiology on living individuals, whilst you doctors study it on dead bodies. And when you study it on a living individual, your understanding is very, very different. And through that, he could actually be able to treat individuals who came with various disorders, where often medical science had failed. So it started, and that's how people got into yoga, and then they continued on their path. Interestingly, when he was in England, and he was asked by the Inner London Education Authority to start teaching there. But they said, we don't want the philosophy to come in, we don't want religion, we want you to use Sanskrit terms. He took up the challenge, he taught them on a physical front, and it is the same people who actually are now studying the Yoga Sutras with all the depth. So they asked for it. He went to the levels and then let the people move upwards, or I would say inwards, not upwards.
Well, as a very simple example that anyone can do, one of the first practices or engagement with Guruji's yoga is to simply stand. And to stand and to balance and to look at the way the soles of your feet balance the body. And that becomes the first exercise, really, into bringing to awareness through the body where our emotions, feelings, knots, or where they lie. We have frequently begun to associate yoga with the most sort of complex, bizarre exercises which only very, very advanced practitioners can do, and the rest of us attempt at great peril to ourselves. And it was this ability of Guruji to span the entire spectrum of yoga, from the simple ability to stand correctly in poise and balance, balancing one's weight and one's belly if you had one, so that you were in perfect inner alignment.
Do you want them to do it?
Well, yes, why not? Do you want to have a try? Do you want to have a shot? Please do that and just see what
stand
happens.
up. All of you
she
can
will
stand
lead
up.
You through it.
Just stand. Spread your feet little apart. Now, when you may, if you have shoes, now just watch inner edges of the feet parallel, because we tend to turn the toes out, which narrows the back, and then we complain of back pain. So look down, inner edges of your feet parallel, stand erect. Now when you are just standing, and if you bring your feet still closer, touching each other as far as possible, are you standing equally on both your feet? Yes? Or is the body weight swing? Is it going back and forth? Sideways. Now I will say, move your attention to the frontal thighs and move the thigh muscles back. So as if your mind is moving the frontal thighs back. Now what happens to the firmness in the legs? Better? What happens to the abdomen? Recedes? Something which most people aesthetically want. Now move the thigh muscles further back. Raise the chest up. Now what happens to the mind? You become more alert. Maybe our talk would have made you drowsy, but when you're standing straight, your mind gets alert. Now extend the tips of the fingers down. Keep the elbows straight. Now what is the alertness in the arms? Now release. So you can see it's a simple way when you stand, how you stand, and if you can extend this to the various asanas, over 200 of them, each and every cell of the body comes to life. Otherwise, our respiratory system is breathing, but the cells are not breathing. And we need to bring life to each cell of the body. You can sit down.
Thank you.
You know, Iyengar Yoga is frequently confused and tends to emphasize in the popular perception the use of props. And people have sort of celebrated Guruji for introducing props as aids for people to achieve particular postures that their physiologies would not ordinarily allow. I'm going to ask Rajvi to reflect on the role of props, their significance and importance in Guruji's yoga.
Okay, before I answer that, how many of you are familiar with the use of props? So very few. So I'll just go back to, when you have different asanas that you do, you need to attain stability. The definition of asana is Sthiram Sukham Asanam. So you need to have that stability. Now if you're doing complex asanas, like say Shirshasana, where you are on your head, or Sarvangasana, where you're on your shoulders, it would be very difficult for an ordinary person to be stable. And because of that, you would either not do the asana, or you would do it for a fraction of a second and not get effect or the benefit of it. So he designed very common household articles. It were chairs, tables, belts, pillows, bolsters, which he used as supports so that people did the asana correctly rather than believing that they did it. So sometimes you believe we are doing this, but there was no question of belief. You actually did it correctly. And over a period of time, these props have become a billion, I would say, the last figures from the American associations were a $6 billion industry. So that are the use of props. And props make it possible for people of any age, any health status, do the asanas. In fact, today, asanas are associated with a yoga mat which people walk around with. Branded yoga mats, Reeboks, Nikes, etc. These were also his discovery. Because in the European countries, when people practiced on the floor, their feet used to slip. So he saw this under a carpet, which was used for the carpets not slipping, and said, hey, this could be useful. And then they became sticky mats and yoga mats now. So he devised this for the benefit of people to practice correctly, precisely, and be able to stay in the asana to attain the effects that asanas give. Over a period of time, among the practitioners of yoga, they have believed that anybody who uses props becomes Iyengar yoga. So if you look at his classical first text, The Light on Yoga, there are no props used at all. And I'll just give you an example that how common it has become for props to be associated with Iyengar yoga is that in China about 10 years ago, or I would say 12 years ago in 2005, they had the first workshop on Iyengar yoga. And after 2 classes, the students were very agitated. So I asked my translator, what's the problem? Why are they so agitated? Fuchi. I said, what's Fuchi? Prop. So I said, so what? If they had asked for the props, they hadn't arrived. So the class goes on saying, Fuchi yoga, Iyengar yoga is prop yoga. I said, first of all, there is nothing like, they didn't even know there were man by the name of Iyengar. And for that matter, then they were explained that this whole thing is devised by an individual. And here I think I would like to emphasize the fact that we students call it Iyengar yoga. He always said that yoga is one. It's just that different people call it by different names. So students would say yoga in the tradition of BKS Iyengar. And that was too long to say that then it became an adjective, Iyengar yoga. And today people just call up, I do Iyengar. And I'm sure my friend here would sort of laugh and say, how can you do Iyengar? It's a tradition, it's a community. But that's how his name has become so synonymous with yoga. Because of these props, people could experience yoga, and it has played a very important role in the popularization of yoga to one extent, and after the popularization for people to improve their quality of life. So when the quality of life increases, when a person is lying down and is very, very tired, all you do is take a pillow and support the back. The chest opens out, you feel so relaxed that you recover very, very quickly. So small tools and aid for a person who is in a negative state to come to the neutral state to pursue on the positive path of the actual aspirations of yoga. So that's how we brought in the props.
One of the demands of sort of modern contemporary communities and shall I, for want of a better word, consumers of yoga, is sort of empirical validation. I mean, does yoga work? Now, to measure does yoga work is extremely challenging at one level, largely because it is the particularization, the individualization that it involves. So you're unable to evolve the kind of broad-based protocols, which is something that the West is very excited about for everything it demands when you're testing medication, when you're testing techniques. Because of that, it becomes very difficult to replicate the same approach in 10 different individuals who may have the same conditions, who require 10 different treatments for one another, sort of compromise on a word. But yet, within that framework, Rajvi's organization in Bombay has been doing some path-breaking work in being able to provide a mirror, albeit not yet on the large-scale product testing that Western pharmaceutical companies are frequently able to fake. And I think that this is the scope of this is modest but extremely significant. So I'm going to request Rajvi to share some of that experience.
I would like to say, I admit here, I wear 2 hats. So one is the yoga subjective hat, and I've been formally trained as a scientist, which is a very objective hat. And what happens is that subjectively, if you want to measure yoga, it's very difficult. I mean, we feel good. How do you measure feel good? On the other hand, yoga is subjective, science is objective. Yoga practitioners would say our science goes back to more than 2,500 years, and the modern tools of medicine go back to 400 years. Why should it be proved? Also, what we experience is yoga on the skeletal-muscular physiological front can be measured. A little bit on the emotional front. But how do you measure consciousness? How do you measure intelligence? So I would say, yes, you can measure when I think it is required today to provide evidence when it comes to the therapeutic aspects. Because today, with the popularity of yoga, everything comes under the garb of yoga. I raise my hand up, it becomes yoga. I turn my neck, it becomes yoga. So today, for a person, for the good of the subject, that it survives for the next generations to come, it's important to provide evidence when it comes to therapy, because science demands evidence. And I must say that there are 100 research papers published, not in yoga journals, but in peer-reviewed science journals of very high impact factor. And these studies have been done independently by universities across the world who have used the methodology of Guruji's tradition as an intervention. And these studies have shown in cases of lower back pain, knee pain, arrhythmia, where modern science does not still have evidence. They have shown on depression, they have done brain studies to show that the blood flow to the brain is different in yoga practitioners. So the amygdala, which is what I would say excited in post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, is actually having lesser blood flows. By the frontal brain, which is used in multitasking, there's an increased blood flow. So that sort of explains when you say yoga makes you better in whatever you do. We have done studies over the last 10 years in patients with Parkinson's disease, which is defined as a progressive neurological disorder. And the definition, moment you hear progressive, I think it just breaks the heart of the patient. We took it up because a support group came to us with 30 patients, and I must tell you that in a span of 3 months, their movement improved, and it was quantified using the same scales which are used for drugs. We then followed them up for over 2 years, and there are a few who have actually improved. So the point is that they have to continue. It's not like I do it, it's magic, it'll go away. You have to continue doing it. So we've done more studies on gait, emotions, and now we are actually replicating the model in other countries too, where we have qualified teachers. So this has to definitely, it cannot be said anybody and everybody can do it or the patient can do it on their own. But yes, where you have an experienced qualified teacher, they are able to replicate it. So we have developed, I would say, within the system, protocols for specific problems and also for the protocols for teaching at different levels, which are universal, so if you go to an Iyengar yoga class in say Mumbai or you go to it in New York or any part of the world, you will immediately feel the similarity. Because I think for anything, it should not be left to one individual training, but it has to be replicated. And of course, the individual teacher brings their own flavors with it.
Well, we have, according to this, 7 minutes and 1 second left. We have a choice, and I leave this call to Rajvi. We have a 5-minute clip of Guruji explaining the aspiration of yoga.
I think so.
Either we play that or we can do a Q&A. Shall we just play that?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm afraid you'll see my mug in that for 20 seconds. What for you is the ultimate goal? And we will come to some of the techniques and practices and the stages, because there is obviously a popular misconception which you have drawn attention to, that yoga is basically postures and training the body towards the ultimate access to the mind. But let's just stay with the goal, the ultimate goal of yoga.
No doubt, we all speak of happiness. You know, happiness has also got its own compartments. Like health having different compartments. Happiness also has got different compartments. Physical health, ethical health, mental health, intellectual health, conscious health, conscientious health, and divine health. All put together is real health. Till then, one cannot say that I am healthy. Similarly, like the Sapta Pranta Bhumika of Prajna, there are 7 states of awarenesses. So first awareness is the awareness of these 7 stages of health. Then comes the 7 stages of controlling the Sharira Jnana, or the complete understanding of each and every function of the body, Sharira Jnana. Then Prana Jnana, how the breath moves and coordinates with the prana for inner cleaning, cleansing the inner body, which cannot be visible to our eyes. Then each and every cell of our body is ethically disciplined in functioning healthily. Functioning healthily. Then comes the mental healthiness, where we are all caught up in lust, anger, greed, infatuation, pride, and envy. These are the emotional weeds which affects the mind. As such, the yogic discipline works in such a way that love without lust, anger without showing from the mind, but as if it is separate entity. When this art is developed, then the mind comes under control, so it experiences a state of poise, or I can say passivity, quietness, latitude. So when that state comes, as Holiness said, that is the stage where one has to jump towards to experience what real happiness is. Happiness is definitely subjective. It depends upon each individual. According to Yoga Sutra, Patanjali says that when he speaks of Samadhi, he speaks of Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita. I am taking first four, where the head being a logical seat of intellect, Vichara, mind being the seat of the intelligence, there should be a thorough communication between the intellect of the head and the intellect of the heart. When they get blended together, then Patanjali says there is a joy. The moment the word joy, Ananda comes, the I, the quality of the I fades out. That is not Ananda, it nullifies the consciousness. As it nullifies the consciousness, then the last stage is Satchitta. You experience the true quality of the consciousness, which is pure in itself without any colorization. And that we call it Satchidananda, but it is only Satchit because there is no Ananda. Ananda is on the I, quality of the I, beyond the mind, is the Prajna, or you call it Atma Prajna. So there, Atma has no happiness, no suffering, nothing. So that is known as unalloyed poise, unalloyed peace, unalloyed joy. And the aim of yoga is to experience the non-colorization of happiness, which ends only when one reaches from the physical, from the skin, going through the inner body, cleansing the inner body, cleansing the mind, cleansing the intelligence, cleansing the consciousness, so that when all these precepts or all the vehemence of this self is completely cleansed, then there is nothing but joy, which cannot be called as a joy, which is beyond joy. And that I call is a real happiness.
Well, time has ticked away. This was part of a historic conversation between the Dalai Lama and the B.K. Iyengar. It ran for 1.5 hours, where Guruji gave actually demonstrated yoga asanas and their impact. It's on YouTube. It's called Paths to Happiness. And if you will look to, Dalai Lama and Iyengar, it will crop up. It actually is almost a travesty because we live in an age where brevity is the soul of wit. And so we've sort of rushed through this presentation, whereas the very essence of the yogic approach is nurturing patience, is nurturing living moment to unfolding moment. So time has raced by. Thank you, Rajvi. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a great video.